Chapter 155, Patriotism. It was late in the evening of the day on which Richard adopted the measures just recorded to ensure the most complete investigation into the case of Catherine Wilmot, that a foreigner called at Markham Place and requested a few moments' private conversation with our hero. The request was immediately acceded to, and the foreigner was shown into the library. He was a man of middle age with a dark complexion and was dressed with considerable taste. His air was military and his manners were frank and open. He addressed Richard in bad English and tendered an apology for thus intruding upon him. Markham believed him by his accent and appearance to be an Italian, spoke to him in that language, and the foreigner immediately replied in the same tongue with a fluency which convinced our hero that he was not mistaken relative to the country to which his visitor belonged. "The object of my visit is of a most important and solemn nature," said the Italian, "and you will excuse me if I open my business by asking you a few questions." "This is certainly a strange mode of proceeding," observed our hero, "but you are aware that I must reserve to myself the right of replying or not to your queries as I may think fit." "Undoubtedly," said the Italian, "but I am a man of honor, and should our interview progress as favorably as I hope, I shall entrust you with secrets which will prove my readiness to look upon you in the same light." "Proceed," said Richard. "You speak fairly." "In the first place, am I right in believing that you were once most intimate with a certain Count Alteroni, who resides near Richmond?" "Quite right," answered Richard. "Do you or do you not entertain good feelings toward that nobleman?" "The best feelings, the most sincere friendship, the most devoted attachment," exclaimed our hero. "Are you aware of any particulars in his political history?" "He is a refugee from his native land." "Does he now bear his true name?" "If you wish me to place confidence in you," said Richard, you will yourself answer me one question before I reply to any further interrogatory on your part." "Speak," returned the Italian stranger. "Do you wish to propose to me anything whereby I can manifest my attachment to Count Alteroni without injury to my own character or honor?" demanded Richard. "I do," said the stranger solemnly. "You can render Count Alteroni great and signal services." "I will then as frankly admit to you that I am acquainted with all which relates to Count Alteroni," said Richard, dwelling upon the words marked in italics, which is the word all and the word Count Alteroni. "With all which relates to Prince Alberto of Castelcicala?" added the stranger in a significant whisper. "Do we understand each other?" "So far that we are equally well acquainted with the affairs of His Highness the Prince," answered Richard. "Right. You have heard of General Grachia?" said the foreigner. "He is also an exile from Castelcicala," returned Markham. "He is in England," continued the foreigner. "I had the honor to be his chief aide-de-camp when he filled the post of Minister of War, and I am Colonel Morosino." Richard bowed in acknowledgment of this proof of confidence. "General Grachia," proceeded Morosino, "reached England 2 days ago. His amiable family is at Geneva. The general visited Prince Alberto yesterday and had a long conversation with His Highness upon the situation of affairs in Castelcicala. The Grand Duke is endeavoring to establish a complete despotism and to enslave the country. One province has already been placed under martial law, and several executions have taken place in Montoni itself. The only crime of the victims was a demand for a constitution. General Grachia represented to His High Prince Alberto the necessity of taking up arms in defense of the liberties of Castelcicalans against the encroachment of despotism. The reply of the prince was disheartening to his friends and partisans. 'Under no pretense,' said he, 'would I kindle civil war in my native country.'" "He possesses a truly generous soul," said Richard. "He is so afraid of being deemed selfish," observed the colonel, "and no one can do otherwise than admire that delicacy and forbearance which shrink from the idea of even appearing to act in accordance with his own personal interests. The prince has everything to gain from a successful civil war, hence he will not countenance that extremity." "And what does General Grachia now propose?" asked Markham. "You are aware that when Prince Alberto was exiled from Castelcicala for having openly proclaimed his opinions in favor of a constitution, and of the extension of the popular liberties, numbers of his supporters in those views were banished with him. We know that there cannot be less than 2,000 Castelcicalan refugees in Paris and London. Do you begin to comprehend me?" "I fear that you meditate proceedings which are opposed to the wishes of His Highness Prince Alberto," said Markham. The friends of Castelcicalan freedom can undertake what in them would be recognized as pure patriotism, but which in Prince Alberto would be deemed the result of his own personal interests or ambitions. True, said Richard, the distinction is striking. The prince, moreover, in the audience which he accorded to General Grachia yesterday evening, used these memorable words. Were I less than I am, I would consent to take up arms in defense of the liberties of Castelcicala, but, being as I am, I never will take a step which the world would unanimously attribute to selfishness. Those were noble sentiments, said Markham, well worthy of him who uttered them, and worthy of serving as rules and suggestions for the patriots of Castelcicala, cried Colonel Morosino. There are certain times, Mr. Markham, he continued, when it becomes a duty to take up arms against a sovereign who forgets his duty toward his subjects. Men are not born to be slaves, and they are bound to resist those who attempt to enslave them. Those words have often been uttered by a deceased friend of mine, Thomas Armstrong, observed Richard. Thomas Armstrong was a true philanthropist, said the colonel. Were he alive now, he would tell you that subjects who take up arms against a bad prince are as justified in so doing as the prince himself could be in punishing those who violate the laws. In plain terms, said Richard, General Grachia intends to espouse the popular cause against the tyranny of the Grand Duke. Such is his resolution, answered Colonel Morosino, and now that you have heard all these particulars, you will probably listen with attention to the object of my present visit. Proceed, Colonel Morosino, said Richard. You must be well aware that, as one well attached to His Highness Prince Alberto, I cannot be otherwise than interested in these communications. I shall condense my remarks as much as possible, continued the officer. General Grachia purports to enter into immediate relations with the Castelcicalans now in London and Paris. Of course, the strictest secrecy is required. The eventual object will be to purchase 2 or 3 small ships which may take on board at different points those who choose to embark in the enterprise. In these ships will have a common rendezvous. When united, they will sail for Castelcicala. A descent upon that territory would be welcomed with enthusiasm by 9/10 of the population, and the result, added Morosino in a whisper, the inevitable result must be the dethronement of the Grand Duke and the elevation of Alberto to the sovereign seat. That the project is practicable, I can believe, said Markham. That it is just, I am also disposed to admit. But do you not think that a bloodless revolution might be effected? We hope that we shall be enabled to successfully assert the popular cause without the loss of life, returned Morosino. But this can only be done by means of an imposing force, and not by mere negotiation. You consider the Grand Duke to be so wedded to his despotic system? Asked Markham interrogatively. What hope can we experience from so obstinate a sovereign and so servile an administration as that of which Signor Pisani is the chief? Demanded Colonel. Surely you must allow that patriotism must not have too much patience. By allowing despots to run their race too long, they grow hardened and will then resist to the last at the sacrifice of thousands of lives and millions of treasure. Such is, alas, the sad truth, said Richard. At the same time, a fearful responsibility attaches itself to those who kindle with civil war. Civil wars are excited by 2 distinct motives, returned the colonel. In one instance, they are produced by the ambition of aspirants to power. In the other, they take their origin in the just wrath of a people driven to desperation by odious tyranny and wrong. The latter is a sacred cause. Yes, and a most just one, exclaimed Markham. If, then, I admit that your projects ought to be carried forward, in what way can my humble services be rendered? I will explain this point to you, answered Colonel Morosino. General Grachia, myself, and several staunch advocates of constitutional freedom met to deliberate last evening upon the course to be pursued, after the general had returned from his interview with the prince at Richmond. We sat in deliberation until a very late hour, and we adopted the outline of the plans already explained to you. We then recognized the necessity of having the cooperation of some intelligent, honorable, and enlightened Englishmen to aid us in certain departments of our preliminary arrangements. We must raise considerable sums of money upon certain securities which we possess. We must ascertain to what extent the laws of this country will permit our meetings, or be calculated to interfere with the progress of our measures. We must purchase ships ostensibly for commercial purposes, and we must adopt great precautions in procuring from outfitters the arms, clothing, and stores which we shall require. In all these proceedings, we require the counsel and aid of an Englishman of honor and integrity." "Proceed, Colonel Morosino," said Richard, seeing that the Italian officer paused. We then found ourselves at a loss where to look for such a confidential auxiliary and adviser, when one of our assembly spoke in this manner. "I came to this country, as you well know, at the same time as His Highness the Prince. From that period until the present day I have frequently seen His Highness, and I became aware of the acquaintance which subsisted between His Highness and an English gentleman of the name of Richard Markham, who was introduced to His Highness by the late Thomas Armstrong. I am also aware that a misunderstanding arose between the Prince and Mr. Markham. The nature of that misunderstanding I never learnt, but I am well aware that even while it existed, Richard Markham behaved in the most noble manner in a temporary difficulty in which His Highness was involved. I also know that the motives which led to that misunderstanding have been completely cleared away, and that the Prince now speaks in the highest terms of Mr. Richard Markham. Address yourself, then, to Mr. Markham. He is a man of honor, and with him your secret is safe, even if he should decline to meet your views. Thus spoke our friend last night, and now the cause and object of my visit are explained to you. You have spoken with a candor and frankness which go far to conquer any scruples that I might entertain in assisting you," said Richard. "At the same time, so important a matter demands a mature consideration. Should I consent to accept the office with which you seek to honor me, I should not be a mere lukewarm agent. I should enter heart and soul into your undertaking. Nor should I content myself with simply succoring you in an administrative capacity. Oh no," added Richard, enthusiastically, as he thought of Isabella, "I would accompany you on your expedition when the time comes, and I would bear arms in your most righteous cause." "Generous young man," cried the colonel, grasping our hero's hand with true military frankness, "God grant that your answer may be favorable to us, but pray delay not in announcing your decision." "This time tomorrow evening I will be prepared to give you an answer," returned Markham. The colonel then took his leave and said, "Tomorrow evening I will call again." Okay, that's the end of the chapter. So there is an insurrection planned in Castelcicala, and Richard has been asked to help with it. And he said, if I'm doing this, I'm not just putting my toes in the water, I'm diving in all the way. So if he decides to go forward, it means he's headed to Italy to fight in a civil war. And we feel kind of torn because we recognize the importance of the people being free and the Grand Duke not oppressing them, and we want to see Count Altroni and his family restored. But at the same time, that brings down the wife of the Grand Duke. Why is her name escaping me? Oh, from Volume 1, who pretended to be her own brother. I don't know why I can't think of her name. But her interests are tied into this as well. So we'll see what Markham's decision is.